Joining us tonight, Carla Robbins, Deputy Editorial Page Editor of the New York Times, and Gideon Rose, Managing Editor of Foreign Affairs magazine. Thanks to both of you for being with us. Carla, I'll start with ladies first. There he was, our president, conducting not one but two wars, accepting the Nobel Peace Prize this week. Your thoughts about that?
Well, it was a pretty extraordinary speech. Extraordinary because he went right to the irony, and he said, the profound nature of the controversy. He fingered more than anything else on the fact that he is the commander-in-chief of a military of a nation in the midst of two wars, as he put it. He also made what I thought was a far more compelling argument for his decision to escalate in Afghanistan than he did even last week. I found that speech very strong last week, and he made a compelling intellectual argument, but it was lacking the emotional fire of Obama. And there he was. He was making the more transcendent argument, and the reason why they gave him the Peace Prize in the first place, which is this is a man who banned torture, committed to multilateral action, all of that. But he said, as much as I follow and respect Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King, and wouldn't even have been there if it weren't for King, he said, there are times in which I can't always follow this, that there are times in which you have to fight a war.
So in accepting the Peace Prize, he made the case for war.
Well, yeah, he made the case for a certain kind of just war at certain times in certain places, and I think I would go even further than Carla did. I mean, he had me at hello in the first place, but the speech was, I think, this is the best speech I've heard or seen from him since the election, frankly. And it really was incredibly, not just stirring emotionally, because rhetoric can do that, but intellectually serious and morally serious. This was a defense of the United States and the role it can play in the world that really should command bipartisan support. It's rational and moral, that's serious without being reckless and responsible. I thought it was a great speech. And what I'm hearing from the people who I trust on the inside is that he actually wrote and rewrote many of the key sections himself, which is even more impressive, frankly.
Although I think he probably wrote and rewrote many of the sections in last week's speech as well. He is a lawyer, and that's why it had that sort of legal brief. But I think that he felt last week, having come out of this incredible debate, that he had to sort of explain all of the different steps in it. This speech was this sort of ringing argument, and he even used the word, he said there was evil in the world. That's one of those sort of George Bush words. And the committee chose him in many ways because he's not George W. Bush. And he didn't shy from it. He didn't pull his punches. He made no apologies.
One analysis I read said that of all the options he had on Afghanistan, this one may or may not succeed, but the others, either pulling out immediately or maintaining the status quo, would have been doomed to fail.
Do
you agree with that?
All the options on Afghanistan are lousy, and I think that the one he's chosen is partly a kick the can down the road option. You can make a case for it. The troop surge is what's happening now. The pledge to maybe rethink about considering withdrawing a couple of years down the road is still notional at this point. But it's the least bad option, I agree, given many options on the table.
And no better example of that, of course, than in Iraq this week. This was such a bloody week in Iraq. Even as they were calling for elections. Give us your thoughts about that.
I actually think that things are getting better, albeit slowly and gradually. Donald Rumsfeld used to use the image of a bicycle and somebody going along on the bicycle and us holding the bicycle. And the question was, if they start to wobble, do you let them sort of ride it out because they have to ride the bicycle, or do you step in to stabilize it? And the Bush administration for a long time tried very hard to let the bicycle go, it wouldn't. It was about to fall. And so we finally stepped in and stabilized it ourselves with the surge and so forth. But now we are actually doing in Iraq what Obama says we will eventually do in Afghanistan, trying to let them have responsibility, withdrawing gradually after having devolved authority. And there are going to be problems. The bicycle will wobble. There will be balance. But the question is it going to wobble so much that they fundamentally fall over? And I don't think that's going to happen.
And I also think the question and the linkage to the elections is that I think most Iraqis are just tired of the war. On the other hand, they have been up for grabs for a long time, as are the Afghans right now, desperately. If there is progress, if there are elections, and we are seeing compromises, we're also seeing how messy the whole thing is.
So say if we can get to that point,
yeah,
right?
But although it's moving forward, but this were five simultaneous bombs. It is a reminder that the insurgency is still there, but I have always felt that there was not a military solution in Iraq, that you had to use the military to give them political space. Ultimately, they have to take responsibility for themselves. Gates says they're going to remain on schedule to pull out. I think he said that not because of the bombing. I think he said it because they are moving forward with the election. The reality is they can't send those troops, keep those troops escalated to Afghanistan, and not do a drawdown, both politically and militarily. So I think that they're getting out of Iraq.
On the subject of moving forward, what are the prospects of an agreement, a climate change agreement, coming out of Copenhagen?
Well,
will there be any?
It depends on how you define agreement. I mean, an agreement with fixed targets, commitments for developing countries, for wealthy nations, how much money the wealthy nations are going to kick in, I don't know. This has been a week of throat clearing. I think everyone's betting is that there's going to be some sort of interim agreement that has notional targets, a commitment from the wealthy nations to help the developing nations doing it. It's aspirational. It's still pretty far down the road itself. I think it's good that Obama is going, that the heads of state are going to be there. But the AP is reporting right now that they do have this draft. It's going around for an interim agreement that has some numbers attached to it, but no money numbers attached to it. I think it's very hard to tell at this. I would predict that they will come out with something they'll call an agreement, but there'll be so many blanks there that it really is going to use your phrase, kick the can down the road.
The emissions drawdown is even more notional and vaporous than the Afghan withdrawal deadline. What was it? Augustine was supposed to have said, "The Lord make me chaste, but not yet." I think that's the kind of approach we're going to take on climate here. Everyone will get around the idea that we should indeed do things, but then have no actual plan or commitment for doing them. And so this can will be kicked down the road with potentially dangerous consequences, but we'll see.
All right, thank you to you both for joining us to talk about the week's event. Gideon Rose, Carla Robbins.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us.